after you leave, right? And you've got to start thinking in that kind of, I've got to step back, less is more kind of way. I'll give you a story from Baghdad on that. Some of you may know Hyper Street, just off the Green Zone, and there's a bunch of 18-story ex-Baathist apartment buildings down there. I was out there once with a cavalry unit, with the civil affairs team, and we're talking to these guys who are like the superintendents in these buildings, and all these buildings were Baathists. They were all Baath party accommodation. But a lot of other families moved in there after 2003. And we're talking to this guy, and it's a self-help discussion. And this building is a brothel. And we're like, dude, you got to really fix this building. Leaks over here, electrical problem over there. We can help you do that, but it has to be a self-help program that you guys start. And they say, why? Why would we do that? These are government buildings. You do it. And we say, we're not doing it. We don't have the asset for that. You guys are 2 miles from the Green Zone, you do it. And we have this back and forth. And eventually, Steve Miska, who some of you guys may know, is the brigade deputy commander, works for J.B. Burton. You guys know that guy. He says to them, I'm going to be back in a week, and I want to hear your plan for how you're going to fix this thing. So go away, we come back a week later, and the guy takes us down to the basement, and he shows us this plaque on the side of the wall, and it says, this building is a gift to the people of Iraq from the government of Japan. And he says that the Japanese need to fix the building. That's our priority, right? If you are a 45-year-old Iraqi, you lived the first 40 years or so of your life in an environment where the worst thing you could do, the most lethal thing that you could do was to show individual initiative. So what you got to do is wean these guys off that and convince them that you can make decisions for yourself and no one's going to kill you. You better be sure no one's going to kill them, right, before you start doing that. But that's the aim. So again, like I said, it's maneuver, right? And you've got to read the battle, you've got to engage with the population, you've got to figure it out, but follow that basic sliding scale of advice to execution to transition, and somewhere in there you're going to find that sweet spot where you work. Yeah.
Questions from your book. How do you recommend, you talk about how we're getting a message out. How do you recommend how the government gets the message out and how the military gets its message out in coin-related environments?
You have a real problem in counterinsurgency because you've got to convince two populations. You've got to convince the American population to keep supporting the effort, and you've got to convince the local population that you're going to win. And when the two groups have the same values, that would be easy. But I've got to tell you, the values of Pashtuns in Afghanistan and the values we have here, right? Women's literacy in Pashtun parts of Afghanistan is between 6 and 15%. You know why that is? Because Pashtun men like it like that. So if we go out there and we start bringing in these women's education programs and we say we're going to have women's microcredit, right, which works all over Africa, we're going to deliver that same kind of program here in Afghanistan. That's what we're doing is exactly the stuff that the Soviet-backed government did in 1979 that provoked this whole war in the first place, right? Does it mean we're not going to do it? No, we're still going to do it. But you've got to figure out how are you going to engage with the population in such a way to send that message. There's something I've seen a number of units do that's pretty useful, and I talked about this real briefly in the book, is the use of influence teams, okay? So you can bring the aid to everybody on an equal basis, and it will basically have no political effect. Or you can have aid go into the areas where it's most secure, and you're able to work with the population. And the PRT and the civil affairs teams can work around the fringe of that. And what they can do is they can act as influence teams, and they can go out and pitch the population. And they say, hey, see this village over here? The reason they're getting all this assistance is because they're working with the government, they turn in all the Taliban from their district, they met these criteria. If you want the same stuff they've got, you need to do the same thing. And here's the deal. And you have guys out on the ground negotiating deals with the population to get them into the tent. That's a very, very valuable civil affairs function, which in fact, there's not that many guys out there that can carry it out, except for civil affairs groups. So I would say civil affairs and PRTs operating around the fringe, the aid guys, the civil guys in the center, creates that example effect where everyone's like, yeah, I want some of that. And you generate that sort of vote with your feet, where people start to come in and partner with you. Now, in Afghanistan, we didn't do that, right? We threw the bulk of our effort into the worst areas. Instead of throwing it into the better areas and using it as an example, we threw it into areas where the absorptive capacity just wasn't there in a lot of cases. So part of it, again, is about smart advice from civil affairs guys, PRT guys, they have the right background, and the aid agencies to the combat commanders to explain, you know, how this stuff actually works.
We got to get this out.
Okay. Thanks for